Well, I hope you had this time to stretch out a little bit. It's now time for my predecessor as an organizer of a Congress. It's my privilege to introduce to you all Lucie Morisset, who is going to talk about learning from industrial heritage, company towns and sustainable community development. Welcome, Lucie.
Thank you, Roine. Good morning still. Good morning, everybody. I'd like first to thank Doug, Roine, and all the organizing team for having me and helping me here. I'm going to get more traditional than what we heard and talk about something that you all know quite well, company towns. They have been discussed in various TICCIH congresses since the 1990s, so I do not believe that I'm bringing here something that is very new or surprising to anybody. However, what I would like to try is to push our reflection a bit forward to see how and why we could enrich our consideration of company towns and the manner in which we study company towns. Several persons in this TICCIH Congress have underlined some discrepancies between the values through which we assess heritage and the recognition of industrial heritage. I think that what I'm pursuing, I'm pursuing here on this path with the specific case of company towns, while reflecting on how and why industrial heritage carries what I will call a public value, in our present world. So here's how I plan to share this idea with you. My main argument here is that we keep considering company towns as we would Roman aqueducts or medieval castles, whereas they're quite different from the standpoint of heritage. As industrial heritage is already and has been from the start a key field in redefining heritage values and renewing how society considers heritage, I think that we're ready now to go one step further. What I will defend here is that first, company towns, especially in the 20th century, have motivated the growth and development of urban planning as an art and as a science of building a relationship between the people and the land. Two, for that reason, the use of specific heritage values to assess company towns is currently insufficient and does not allow for their sustainable recognition and protection. And three, considering company towns at their fair heritage value is important for two reasons. Because heritage is also a relation to the land, that is, as well as company towns, and because company towns can inspire lessons on the role of heritage and on the role of public policies in this matter and in that of local development. I'm thus pursuing the line followed by Doug when he asked on Wednesday and in a recent paper that I just read, and I quote, "Can legacies from the past also help Arctic mining towns in transition to survive?" So first, of course, what is a company town? A company town, or at least the company towns I'm referring to, a company town is a planned industrial town created at the behest of a company as a place of production. I will not insist here on typologies of worker villages, factory towns, and the such. What I want to insist on here is that a company town is a new town planned to become some kind of an urban entity. And I am more specifically interested here in company towns of, say, the 20th century, often further from ancient centers on a larger scale than 18th and 19th century industrial villages. These company towns planned in the 20th century actually form, as you can see here, they form a large part of company towns in general. So they're not a minor phenomenon, nor are they not calling for our heritage interest now. On the contrary. To give you an example, I cannot think of any better example here than Kiruna, planned from the beginning of the 20th century as an ideal Arctic town, as was shown to us on our visit on Monday. So for the example, Kiruna is obviously what I call here a company town, although what you see here does not exist per se anymore, as it was moved or demolished in this fascinating process that we are discovering here. It was moved or demolished since my first visit here in 2012. To this day, some company towns, a growing number actually, have been considered through the lens of heritage. This is much more recent than, say, the Cornish engine, but some company towns are even now on the World Heritage List. I'm showing here pictures of angles that we do not see that often of 3 of these company towns. Very few company towns have actually been inscribed under the designation company town or even town, which doesn't mean a lot, except that most company towns have actually been designated for other reasons than being a planned urban entity. All of what I would call company towns have been inscribed under Criterion 2. Criterion 2, so that we mostly see here a large landscape. I'll come back on that thing of landscape. A large landscape through a span of time, which is in fact ignoring that such company towns result from a single initial gesture of planning, much as a work of art or a masterpiece of architecture. I think that the values under Criterion 2 are both insufficient and poorly adapted to developing our knowledge and the recognition of company towns. We should also note that the focus of the inscriptions is placed much more often on factories and machines than on the built environment. Housing is mentioned at the best, but almost never the planned settlement. Company towns are the ghost of the history of urban planning. They haunt it, but they remain unseen. Some company towns are on the tentative lists of certain countries, which of course need first to recognize that industrialization is a part of their history, something that still seems hard in some regions of the world, and I'm talking about Canada here. But the fact is that some habits that we have regarding heritage do not seem to favor the recognition of urban ensembles like a magnificent Barra that we see here. Is Barry Gamble around? Well, that was for him anyway. It is for you too. Indeed, while urban planning is in itself rarely mentioned on the World Heritage List, particularly for the 20th century, company towns are, for their part, usually represented through images like this, through a monumental perspective, as if they were singular monuments like 14th century castles, but with a narrative that focuses on something else, obviously. Actually, I would tend to say that as industrial heritage, company towns suffer from 2 obsessions that we, industrial heritage people, that we have, and that drive us to think of heritage more within the frameworks of museums than as living environments. Yiping Dong said that the other day, and this is quite an old debate. We are obsessed with technology, we still being the industrial heritage people that we are here. And we are obsessed with big things. That is what we usually call monuments. This is well suited to, for example, bridges, as Miles has shown here, but much less to living environments, however planned, however designed they might be. Because we do not pay attention to urban planning as we would to the planning of other works, and thus we have no tool to qualify what is basically a living environment. We seek the monument. The Zollverein complex is a very good example of this, especially as its nomination typically ignores the thousands of housing units that are to be found around the, of course, spectacular mining infrastructures. Hence, you will find splendid urban ensembles as this one in Bois-du-Luc, Belgium, where all stakeholders think that there is no heritage to be seen around, even though this is a part of the major mining sites of Wallonia World Heritage Site. As they say locally, they cannot be considered as heritage as they do not have a mine shaft that could be seen from afar. Of course, there has been the introduction of the notion of cultural landscape to encompass the company towns, at least in the World Heritage typologies, which have been declined in some national frameworks. Quebec is actually one of them. Fray-Bentos, that you see here, has been inscribed on the World Heritage list on the account of such a landscape, which indeed puts forward the idea of some kind of ensemble, but precisely in an organic manner, focused here on the industrial production and not on the urban fabric per se, nor on its planning as a creative work laid on the land. And thus, what is developed as heritage in Fray-Bentos is the former plant, much rather than any part of the plant town, housing, and the such. The thing is that, however we speak of cultural landscape to look at what could be previously seen as ordinary or minor or just regular and not monumental, no matter how we speak of cultural landscapes, we still focus on the big things. In UQAM that you see here, all eyes are on the hydroelectric plant and much less on the plant town. On its fabulous housing, there's in fact no discussion here on how this 20th century housing has had a worldwide influence. Nobody even notices the monumental city center with its very city beautiful plan. The Nord-Pas-de-Calais mining basin is also an example of such old habits of heritage that still dominate in industrial heritage. Although the nomination file takes into account the tens of thousands of housing units in this quite large cultural landscape, what is actually protected by law and what is still put forward are the mining shafts, which is actually the source of the inferiority sentiment that we just saw in the mining sites of Wallonia. What I want to say here is that this monumental, very museum-inclined vision, this monumental vision does not suit well the industrial heritage nor the company towns. A company town is not, I've said that, a Roman aqueduct, nor is it a Cornish engine or an adjustable wrench. Now, we, the industrial heritage people, we already have succeeded in showing to the world that the Cornish engine is not a medieval castle nor a Roman aqueduct, and thus should be considered on its own merit with its specific values. We now need to do the same thing with company towns. This is precisely what Louis Bergeron wrote in 1995 around the inscription of Crespidada that you see here. Workers' Village, he wrote. As I said, I will not enter here into micro-typologies. Workers' Village, I'm quoting, were one of the most complete expressions of the impact of industrialization on social organization, end of quote. And I would add impact on social organization and on communities and on their culture and on how we define our land, how we define how we belong to the land. But recognizing this from a heritage point of view, Bergeron adds, recognizing this requires a shift a shift of mindset regarding, that is my interpretation, a shift of mindset regarding what heritage is about. But first, we also need to know what company towns are about, how they differ from a Roman aqueduct or a Cornish engine. Company towns, the one that I'm referring to, company towns are about urban planning. They were created with the tools of urban planning to engender desirable places, to foster community identity. The link between a workplace and a meaningful place was not born with industrialization. In fact, my friend Massimo Prete, Massimo, are you there somewhere? Hi, Massimo. My friend Massimo Prete noticed that monasteries, as this beautiful certosa, could be considered as company towns. What did industrialization change then? It changed three things, especially the second industrial revolution. It changed the location and the size of the workplace, that is, the industry. It changed the trades and the qualification of the workers. And it integrated the reaction to social misfortune provoked by industrialization and turned it into the opportunity of a new social order. Hence, older industrial utopias like those of Charles Fourier and Jean-Baptiste Godin, but also more recent ones like that of Henry Ford, have become planning models. All this because, as I said, the industry went further and further in the hinterland to find resources and thus needed to create living environments where there was none, or at least none that the company found suited to its settlement project. And because the second industrial revolution relied on workers who were much more specialized and trained than those who worked in manufacturers or mills. Companies quickly realized that it was more expensive to find, to train, and to retain qualified workers than it was to secure any other resource. So they needed to provide them not only with work and salaries, but also with a place to live and to thrive and to belong, to an identity. It is around these key factors, and thus in company towns, that urban planning and knowledge on urban planning developed, especially in the first half of the 20th century. We can then discover sophisticated plans of some company towns, while more generally, several professional manuals are published on how to plan and to build a good company town with efficient housing, fluid traffic, and landscape identity. My cat loves those manuals. Meet Victoria. One of the very popular themes of this new urban knowledge, to name one popular theme is how to build civic identity with housing, architecture, and a minimum of landscape. That is what you see here in beautiful Yonsore. Is my pronunciation correct? Yeah? Yonsore? Yonsore. Okay? Thank you. Which predates the 20th century, but I felt it had its place here and I needed to practice my Swedish. You can also find international competitions of urban planning as the one that created this neighborhood in Tusedal in Norway. This knowledge of creating a relationship between the people and the land, of course, mobilized architecture, especially regional architecture. You'll then find worker housing that recalls the lumberjacks' traditions in a mining town of northern Quebec here, or housing around a sawmill with architectural features of the regional traditions in Norrbuskär. You heard them. Thank you, I apologize. To take another Swedish example. This is actually the only place I'm showing here that I've not visited for next time. These are just a few examples of the art and science of planning that I'm raising here. And that is usually not recognized through the heritage values that we mobilize nowadays. We recognize the art of painting, we recognize the art of architecture or the art of building, but much less this art of urban planning, especially with its focus on creating a relation to the land. And we also have to consider here that this art of urban planning goes well beyond aesthetics and beyond the idea of cultural landscape, as it is showcased now. For example, when it goes into property funding schemes or into land regulations, it's like the mechanism of a machine that you do not see when you only see the production. So we need to consider it through multiple depths as we would with a machine, the Cornish engine or a telescope, for example, or with a work of architecture. You need to know how it functions in order to appropriate it in the world of heritage. Being planned as they were in order to create a relationship with the land, to create a sense of place, company towns tell us much more about heritage. They do remind us that heritage, which gives sense to an object or to a place, heritage is as much a relation than it is a thing. Being designed to engender such a relation to the land, company towns can actually be seen as heritage by destination. As I was quoting Louis Bergeron, open quote, company towns are commonly understood by their inhabitants as their memory as working communities that lived in different settings and had unique experiences, end of quote. In some cases, company towns have switched to the heritage mode to pursue that relation building into the present world. They are then home to thriving heritage communities. They were planned as a relation to the land. They can now be planned, that is managed, as a relation to a form of historical continuity. In Baden, North Carolina, for example, Badin, as the French would say, where the common relation to the industry has been replaced by a common relation to history. In Roebling, New Jersey, where urban planning is even showcased as a unique heritage. So it's no surprise if, as again Louis Bergeron noticed, if heritage actually appears as a continuity to the industry in giving a meaning to the land and to the relation between people and place that was created through urban planning. The relation to the land is continued into a renewed relation to the land. We have been discussing here about the uses that ensure the preservation of industrial heritage and specifically its continuity. The normal use of a company town is, together with housing, together with living, the relation to the land, the significant relation to the land. Hence heritage kept alive, as Roine was mentioning, heritage kept alive can be seen as a proper reuse of the company town. But we need to learn how to assess that heritage of urban planning if we want to build a common narrative out of it. Now, what does this change to industrial heritage? I think that we can retain 3 lessons from this overview of company towns. The first is that there seems to be a need to refine the criteria through which we assess company towns as heritage, be it on a local, on a national, or on an international level. But we need also to think more of heritage as a living environment and to see company towns beyond the machines, the museums, and the monuments. The second is that the legacy of company towns to heritage and to urban community development becomes even more obvious when we look at the contrary of company towns. And what is the contrary of company towns? Fly in, fly out, FIFO, as they say. For example, in Maria Elena, Chile, which is one of the fine examples of urban planning in 20th century, the Guggenheim Company is replacing this town that it built in 1926 by this. Workers' houses are being abandoned or demolished to be replaced by a jail motel of the sorts, where workers are well kept in, as they often do not even have the papers to circulate around the country. They are flown in and flown out. The historic urban planning and housing, for their part, are in the museum instead of on the street. So you take a company town like Fort McMurray, where Larry was one of the first residents in the northern part of Alberta, where Larry was telling me there in front of his house how this house, this lawn, this planning were the utmost examples of Canada's modernity, of Canada's identity. You take this modern and well-established community in a company town and you just replace it, first with mobile home parks and then with modern jails for fly-in, fly-out workers. Now, of course, companies are entitled to prefer modern slavery to investment in community planning. But public authorities should be worried when this kind of industrialization is just simply extractive, leaving nothing behind. They sometimes are, as we can see here in Kiruna, and I will leave to our host to translate this for you afterwards. The contrary of a company town is a ghost territory, where industry has built communities, identities, and society in general in the 20th century. Fly in, fly out, or drive in, drive out, as they say here in Cabramura, where the whole town is being rebuilt as a giant hotel. Fly in, fly out, leave nothing but ashes and empty mines for the generations to come. We can then compare, to come back on urban planning and on what urban planning is given to company towns and on what company towns have given to urban planning. We can compare the quality of urban spaces and the social place at FIFO villages like this to that of a planned company town as Kirimat here, or as Guayacan here with its church said to have been designed by Gustave Eiffel, or to the Munkebo town center in Denmark, just to show another example. Company towns then bear lesson on public policies as well as on heritage, especially with regards to the role of heritage in our society, if it is to be supported by public policies, as well as land development, I guess, should be supported and framed by public policies. Because company towns are not only replaced by FIFO as a mode of existence, they are also often valued, or at least their land of identity is valued. This is the case of Ayoko that we see here with its last inhabitant, where the heritage status does not have much power against the economic value of some potential redevelopment. Where are the former Ayoko workers? That we don't know. Nor do we know much of what happened to the former workers of Sparrows Point, Maryland. Some of them probably ended up amongst what is called in the US the deaths of despair, and I recommend the reading of Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee on what happened in the Rust Belt. Those who are left behind by the industrialization in a rapidly changing society, where the proud workers of yesterday end up living in their car, and then on the street, and then, well, you know. No matter how sophisticated it becomes, our expertise on industrial heritage Precisely because we have the power to make heritage possible, our expertise on industrial heritage needs to rely on care. Our knowledge cannot afford to be anything but caring. That goes for all knowledge, but it is especially crucial if we are to talk about heritage values and about industrial heritage, because nor former workers nor our children will live in monuments. That is the third lesson that we can learn from company towns. As urban planning masterpieces designed to create a relation to the place, company towns bear a lesson on the role of heritage as a relation to the land, to memory, to continuity. Recognizing and valuing that heritage of urban planning can thus help repair the local discontinuity induced by industry closures. That is to say that as well as heritage, company towns can repair wounded landscapes, as my colleague and friend Magdalena Novoa calls them. Heritage company towns can repair wounded landscapes and wounded people. But we need to know better how to qualify and recognize that heritage. We need to use it against bad or non-existent public policies. We need to use it to teach to ourselves the public value of heritage and to learn to advocate for that public value that builds on the relation between the people and the land. That is, I believe, the lesson of company towns, talking about heritage in action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucie, for a very inspirational speech. If you want the Swedish text analyzed and translated, you can ask Dag to do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And yes, thank you very much once again. We have time for questions to Lucie. Any hand? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Lucie, if I may, for this very impressive, very global presentation about company towns. It happens that I was raised in a company town myself. For several generations, actually, my family worked for a factory who built this company town in Córdoba, southern Spain. And I was actually the first generation who didn't work in the factory because the factory was closing. Instead of that, I did research about this place. This company town was indeed a very interesting place. It was designed by a French architect, even though it was in Spain, and following the ideas of the garden city of Howard. So the point is that when I was doing research there and even some attempts to get the site protected, I found plenty of resistance, in some cases even a little bit of hostility, because the people living there, the last thing they wanted was their houses to become heritage, because that would mean that they would not be free to do with their houses whatever they wanted. So how to deal with this situation? What happens when the community doesn't want the company town to be heritage? How to deal with this?
Thank you for your question. Actually, this is common with heritage. Well, everybody here, I guess, has a story of people not wanting their property to be designated because they won't be free to do what they want with them. But then, if you look at that in a more global perspective, and if we heritage experts do our work in exchanging and sharing with people, first we can show that nobody's against value. You know, we can show to anybody if we allow ourselves to master other narratives than that of the heritage being beautiful and the such, we can say that heritage pays. And nobody will tell you that a heritage designated property is worth less or gains less economic value than a non-heritage property. So you can always show that to people, and it is usually a convincing argument, but the most convincing argument is the one that comes from the people inhabiting their house. And usually people inhabiting heritage houses or workers' houses in company towns hate that place because they think that it has no value anymore. You know, the factory closed, and with that closure came the closure of their existence, of their traditions, of their value as human beings that they had actually shared for generations. And then at some point, some people, some workers learned that while the factory was closing, as the factory was closing, their experience, their life, and that of all their family had no value. Even worse, it had less value than nothing because it polluted, it was bad, it had to be demolished. Now, this devaluation of people and of the experience to people has to be rebuilt if we want to safeguard any heritage, because for whom are we saving that heritage? We're saving that for the people who are there. And their house can be a real good link into recreating a narrative of pride in their relation to the territory, to the memory. When you say your house, you're not a ghost in this house. You're the guardian of a heritage that is now not only yours, but that is recognized by the whole region, by the whole nation, by the whole world. And we recognize you because you are the worker here. We now recognize you as the guardian of this heritage that the whole world values. This change of narrative, I've experienced that in many, many towns, and it usually changes things. But the first thing that we need to do is exactly develop the narrative on the company town. And remember that this is all, as the company town was and as heritage is, it's all a question of relation to the land. So people will love and protect their land if they know they have a relation to it, and that relation is valued by somebody else than the ghosts in their family.
Although I'm completely with you in saving the company towns, I would like to add something as well. I'm from Amsterdam, and many people have visited Amsterdam, and they may know quarters like the Jordaan or the Nieuwmarktbuurt. When these housing quarters, where labor people lived, were put on the monument list 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 10 years later, all those people that were laborers were moved out, the whole area gentrificated, and now it's a yuppie. These are yuppie quarters with beautiful shops and blah, 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 blah. So it is the way how you do it. We all wanted to preserve those quarters in the city. We all want to preserve those houses. But as soon as it means that the original population can no longer stay there, and their houses get value, and it can only be paid by rich people with a car in front of the house, you are completely,
Correct. I completely agree with you. And this is precisely why heritage people like us need to stop being blinded by the aesthetic or the past or the history values of heritage and start talking about the real world out there. That's exactly what I was saying. Heritage as a real economic value for many reasons, but just think of two. One, if I tell you, would you rather stay near a garbage land, or would you prefer stay near a heritage site? Second, would you rather stay in a anonymous suburb, or would you rather stay in a site where the state invests regularly into the public space to ensure its quality? So what we need actually to do is stop leaving these dynamics to the real estate developers and learn to integrate into our public policies this valuation of the land that we have the power to create. We need to learn how to master through public policies this valuation and to capture it in order precisely not to invest in some fly-in, fly-out facility, to get back on my example, or somewhere else. Well, we need to use it to keep the social use of heritage, because of course heritage property just before being heritage is always obsolete. So it's always inhabited by poor people who haven't had the means to modernize it. So it is, as we say in French, dans son jus, and we like it, because it's old and it's. But as soon as we put money and value, symbolic and economic value in that, of course, the poor people or the vulnerable people were there are expelled by market regulations. So if we can control power, economy, as we do with heritage statuses, we should be able to control that valuation and integrate that into heritage public policies. And this is especially a thing central to the mission of industrial heritage people, because this is the thing that happens the most with industrial heritage. So I agree with you.
Any more questions?
I thought you would be hungry.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm curious if you also studied those company towns in some conflicted places. For instance, when I was in Cyprus, I studied Cyprus Mining Company town. It's a very interesting case because there's a forced displacement of people in 1974. And just to say that, I just think that these are all political things and people are friends. No problems among the Turkish and Greek people. But before, in Lefka, Cyprus, the mining company town, which was built by British under the British Rhine at that time, they were forcibly moved to southern part of Cyprus, and the Turkish people on the southern part moved to northern part, and now they are using those lands. And there are some other rare examples in the world, and I just want to learn your thoughts about this. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I haven't studied any of these specifically, but your question testifies to how we need to actually integrate all relations to the land in the narrative of a company town. Without, of course, we cannot say everything at once, but one postdoc fellow who came, and she actually presented this yesterday or 2 days ago here at the chair, studied the practice in some company towns to become what are called in the US sundown towns. So practices of exclusions that were, she's trying to find traces of these practices of inclusion in the urban planning itself, which would, of course, help our narrative nowadays to discuss this heritage, this history. It's a part of history, of course. So she's working on that. I've seen that, actually, which is another version of what you're saying, in Hershey, Cuba. The Cubans say Hershey, It's Hershey, what we call in English Hershey, the chocolate company town, chocolate company, where most of the town actually is built on an orthogonal grid with the houses facing, let's say, north or south for the example. And then suddenly at the end of the town, there's another town, another planned town, with houses facing on the contrary, east or west, that involves a kind of rupture of discontinuity in the urban plan, which is reflected in the urban space and in the urban practices. So this is a thing that can help us to discuss, still talking about relation to the land, to discuss and to put into a narrative and to interpret a history that is more inclusive than that of just the major people, for example, which is the use normally in company towns. Yeah.
Any more questions?
Bon appétit, as we say.